David Hood from IT Training here, just talking through coordinate systems of graphs and adding addenda to graphs in R. So I've got a bit of data and I read that into R and I load it in as a CSV. The data is essentially numbers with headings, but I'm also adding row names because whether it's row or column names, those are things that flow in through to the graph. Then I make it a matrix, a block of numbers, because that's what you use for bar graphs. And because I realise that I want 3 groups of 2 rather than 2 groups of 3, I'm actually transposing the numbers, flipping them around sideways. But the names will stick with the appropriate points. So having gotten my data ready, I make a basic bar plot of the results. Now, all graphs in R have a coordinate system. In this particular graph, it's pretty obvious that there is a y-axis coordinate system. There are numbers on there, but there is also an x-axis one, even though it's not obvious. So you can still do things with that information. Now, if I had gone and read the bar plot help, I would have discovered that if you actually get a value back from it, you get the midpoints of the bars. So that is one way of finding out what's going out on the x-axis. And if I run the print of that, I get some numbers that reflect the x-axis position of the bars. But not all graphs are going to give you that, so sometimes you just draw a bunch of lines. If I make my basic bar plot and then I draw a red line at 1 on the x-axis, vertical 1, and a vertical line at 6 and a vertical line at 20. Well, the vertical line at 20 was actually off the graph, but from the 1 and 6 I get a pretty clear idea of what's going on. Often I will use 1/2, 0.5, 1 and then 10 as steps on the graph just to see what's going on if you want to experiment. But that gives me a sense of where things should go on the x-axis. So I might well apply a whole bunch of settings for making a fancier graph of some sort. And then I start tweaking things. If I want to add annotations, I'm going to need a bit of extra space, so I might add the y-limits setting to increase the graph from, at the moment, 0 to about 90 to 0 to 140. And if I do that, I've now got more space for annotations. However, as a graph of percentages, it doesn't really make sense for the y-axis to go over 100, so I will remove the built-in axis and build a custom one with 20-point steps. I do that and I've solved the axis problem. Now I can start adding things like added lines with the lines function. And I've drawn some dotted lines across an area. Breaking it down, the lines function has a set of points that are the start point, the end point, and turning points in a line. So I've got 4 points. The first point at 2, 115, and then up to 2, 120, then across to 5 and 120, then down to 5 and 115. So that's the x and y coordinates of the points along the line. LTY was make a dashed line and I coloured it purple. So you can draw ad hoc lines in by giving the points along the line that are start points, end points and turning points. I can also add text by much the same principle, by specifying the start point of text. And in this case, if I add the same bar plot, axis and lines, but I add text saying put it at x 3.5 and y 125, so it's a bit above the main part of the line I drew, and labels is the actual text I want to put in this case 3 asterisks. And I could get more and more complicated about that just by adding in more lines with more of the points in each line where I want it to go, and more bits of text with what text do I want to put on at that point. If I do all that, I begin building up a fairly complex set of annotations.